By the spring of 1945, the war was already lost for Nazi Germany. Everyone knew it. The officers knew it. The guards knew it. And the prisoners could feel it in their bones. The Allied armies were closing in from every direction. Artillery thunder rolled across Europe like a storm you couldn't outrun, and inside the camps, something changed. Not mercy, not relief, fear. Because when cruel men realize they are about to lose power, they often become more dangerous than ever. The concentration camps were not quiet places, but in those final weeks, they became tense. Roll calls stretched longer. Food grew thinner. Guards shouted more, hit harder, watched closer. Female prisoners noticed it first. They always did. Women who had survived starvation, disease, forced labor, and endless humiliation suddenly realized the rules were breaking down. Officers stopped following schedules. Orders contradicted each other. Papers were burned at night. And rumors spread like smoke. The Americans are close. The Russians are only days away. They're evacuating camps to the west. That's when the terror shifted. Evacuation orders came suddenly. No planning, no mercy. Thousands of women were forced out of camps like Auschwitz, Ravensbrück, and Gross-Rosen. Weak prisoners were dragged from bunks. Mothers carried children who hadn't walked in months. Sick women were beaten just to stand. These were not organized transports. They were death marches. Nazi officers didn't care who survived anymore. They only cared about control and about erasing witnesses. In the final days, discipline collapsed. Some officers fled. Others stayed behind. And those who stayed often acted like men who believed the world was ending. Female prisoners were especially vulnerable. Guards knew records would never be completed, trials might never happen, names could disappear. Survivors later said the same phrase was whispered again and again. No one will believe you. Threats became personal, punishments became random. Women were separated from groups, pulled from lines, locked into barracks overnight with no explanation. What happened inside those spaces was rarely written down, but it was remembered. The camps were built on dehumanization. But in those last weeks, the masks came off. Officers no longer pretended they were following rules. They didn't hide behind paperwork or ideology. They acted on impulse, rage, and entitlement. Female prisoners were treated not as labor, not even as prisoners, but as objects in a system already collapsing. Survivors later said the cruelty wasn't always loud. Sometimes it was quiet. A locked door. A missing name at roll call. A woman who never came back. Ravensbrück was the largest camp for women. And in April 1945, it became a nightmare inside a nightmare. As Soviet forces approached, SS officers began destroying documents and evacuating prisoners in waves. But thousands of women were left behind, sick, starving, abandoned. Guards selected women under the excuse of medical checks or transport preparation. Some never returned. Others came back silent, hollow-eyed, refusing to speak. The women who survived later said the worst part wasn't pain. It was the certainty that nothing mattered anymore. As liberation neared, parts of camps became lawless. Barracks without oversight. Guard towers empty at night. Officers drinking, panicking, arguing. This is where the worst abuses happened. Not because new cruelty was invented, but because no one stopped it. Female prisoners learned to hide, to cling together, to avoid eye contact, to fake illness or exaggerate it, anything to be overlooked. Being noticed was dangerous. During evacuations, women were marched for days without food or water. If someone collapsed, she was shot or left behind. Some officers used these marches to terrorize prisoners even further. Women were threatened, mocked, and humiliated in front of others. Guards reminded them that liberation didn't mean survival. You won't make it. You'll die on the road. The Allies won't find you. And many didn't. The road itself became a grave. As Allied troops came closer, something strange happened. Some officers simply vanished. Uniforms were burned, insignias ripped off, pistols thrown into rivers. And the prisoners were left with guards who were younger, crueler, and terrified. Teenage recruits with guns and no supervision. Men who didn't know what orders mattered anymore. That uncertainty was deadly. Liberation did not end the suffering. When Allied soldiers entered the camps, they found women who could barely speak. Many were afraid of uniforms, any uniform. Some women refused medical help. Some refused to give names. Some refused to describe what had happened. Because how do you explain cruelty that came after the world already knew the camps were evil? How do you describe harm done in the shadow of freedom? Decades later, survivors began to talk. Not in headlines, not in speeches, in small interviews, in handwritten letters, in broken sentences. They described officers who smiled because they believed they would never be punished, guards who said, "The war is over anyway." What hurt most wasn't just what was done, it was the knowledge that it happened because liberation was near, not because it was far away. After the war, the world wanted clean stories. Heroes, battles, victory. What happened to women in those final days didn't fit neatly into court transcripts or propaganda reels. Many crimes were never prosecuted. Many perpetrators blended back into civilian life. And many survivors chose silence over being doubted. When we say never again, we often think of gas chambers and mass grave. But never again also means recognizing what happens when power collapses without accountability. It means understanding that the final moments of cruelty are often the most revealing. Not because of ideology, but because of human nature. Liberation didn't happen all at once. For many camps, there were days, sometimes weeks, where prisoners heard the front lines but still lived under SS control. You could hear artillery at night. You could see the glow of fires beyond the fences. But the gates stayed locked. Female prisoners said those days were the worst. Hope was close enough to taste, but death was still in charge. Officers knew their time was almost up, and that knowledge poisoned everything. Some Nazi officers began making decisions they believed would never be questioned. They selected prisoners for relocation with no destination. They separated women by age, strength, and appearance. No records, no explanations. Survivors later said these moments felt deliberate, like officers were deciding what kind of men they would be remembered as, if remembered at all. Many chose cruelty. Every camp had women who vanished in the final days. Not executed publicly, not marched out in groups. Just gone. Their bunks empty. Their names unanswered at roll call. Other prisoners learned not to ask questions. Asking meant being noticed meant risk. So the camp filled with absence. As officers fled, control passed to whoever was left behind. Junior guards, auxiliaries, desperate men with weapons and no future. Rules became inconsistent. One guard might ignore prisoners entirely. Another might explode with rage over nothing. Female prisoners said survival depended on reading moods, watching eyes, listening to footsteps, sensing danger before it spoke. It was no longer about obedience. It was about instinct. Nighttime became terrifying. Searchlights failed. Generators cut out. Some guards stopped patrolling. Darkness gave cover, not safety. Women huddled together, trading places, pretending to be someone else, staying awake in shifts. Sleep felt dangerous. Survivors said those nights stretched forever, filled with whispers, prayers, and the sound of distant gunfire growing closer. Some officers lied. They told prisoners they would be released. They promised protection. They claimed surrender negotiations were underway. For a moment, hope flared. Then the lies collapsed. The same officers returned angry, humiliated, more violent than before. Hope, it turned out, could be punished too. Cruelty wasn't limited to men. Some female guards, trained to enforce discipline, became harsher as the system broke down. Others panicked. Some disappeared entirely. Survivors remembered betrayal more than brutality. People who knew their names, who shared meals, who watched and did nothing. Silence became its own weapon. In some camps, the SS fled overnight. Prisoners woke to empty guard towers, abandoned offices, documents burning in barrels. No orders, no authority. Freedom hadn't arrived, but control was gone. The camps entered a strange, terrifying limbo. This was the most dangerous moment of all. No guards, but also no food, no medical care, no protection. Some prisoners died after surviving years because their bodies finally gave out. Others were injured by stray fire as battles passed nearby. Female prisoners helped each other walk, drink, breathe. Survival became communal. When Allied soldiers finally entered, they weren't prepared for what they saw. Not just starvation, not just disease, but women who flinched at voices, who hid when doors opened, who couldn't stand to be alone. Liberation looked different than victory reels showed. It was quiet, confused, overwhelming. Allied officers asked questions. Names, dates, what happened? Many women couldn't answer. Some didn't want to. Some couldn't remember clearly. Some feared consequences even now. Trauma doesn't disappear when uniforms change. After the war, life didn't reset. Many survivors carried what happened in silence. Families didn't ask. Society didn't listen. Some women never spoke about the final days because explaining them felt impossible. Justice came slowly, incomplete, often too late. These stories matter because they show something uncomfortable. Evil doesn't always escalate with power. Sometimes it escalates with fear of losing it. The last days before liberation reveal who people are when consequences vanish. That truth is harder to face than ideology. The camps didn't end in neat chapters. They ended in chaos, cruelty, and survival against all odds. Female prisoners endured the worst not only when the system was strong, but when it was collapsing. And remembering that isn't about blame. It's about understanding what humans are capable of, right up until the moment the gates finally open.